Yeah, I was wondering why you wanted to have me, because I have no idea what a podcast is.
Oh, sugar. Wrong Zoom.
That was the obligatory April 1st joke.
Of course.
All right.
So whenever you're ready there, Ravi, you can take the floor, as they say.
Sounds good. All right. So my name is Ravi Jagoyapal. I'm in San Diego, and I am a two-time podcaster. I had a third one. I closed it out, so I want to focus on two. One is a long form, and one is a shorter form. And I just wrote a book about how to start a podcast. In fact, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was I changed my book 2 days after my title of my book after publishing, 2 days after publishing. And that's the amazing world we live in, that it allows you to change things on the fly. So nothing is, think of everything, as a recipe, whether it's your podcasting or whether it's writing a Kindle book. So my original title was How to Create a Podcast in 7 hours. More research, and then I realized how most newbies would. I did some surveys, and I asked people on Facebook, and I did some Google Trends and SEO searches, and I realized how to start a podcast would be more appropriate for a newbie, new person looking to start a podcast. Right? We will say by nature we would say, "Hey, I want to start a podcast." Not many people say, "I want to create a podcast." Right? Or I want to start a YouTube channel, not create a YouTube channel. So I just changed the title, and it's fun that I can just go in and change things. The same thing goes for podcasting. If you make a mistake, you can always go back, re-edit. If you find something weeks later, this is something even you cannot do on YouTube, because once you publish a video, you cannot edit that video anymore. You can delete it and upload a new one, but then you lost uh, the the view count and all the stats and analytics on that video. But podcasting is, right there with a Kindle book, so you can make changes, you can make edits, you can re-upload the thing, and obviously those who already subscribed to it would have already gotten the audio file, so it won't download again. But for future subscribers and future listeners, you can always go in and make a change. So I'm ready to answer any questions, and I don't claim to be the world's biggest expert on podcasting, but I've my one podcast is about 5 years old now, and another one is like 2 years. So close to over 200 episodes of just the podcast. But in terms of everything else I've created hundreds of audio files, audiobooks, episodes, and a lot of videos for marketing my products and services. And then I've taken a lot of those tutorials, stripped out the audio from the video, used that as an audiobook, and just put it on as a player on my website. So I have quite a bit range of experience with audio. So I'm happy to answer any questions you guys may have for me.
Yeah, Ravi, I was just wondering, what's your main platform for driving engagement?
Uh, it, the main one I would say is my email list, and that is why if you listen to my podcast, I talk about it in my ebooks and courses and everything else. List, build your list, because once you have an email list, it is a lot easier to promote a bunch of different things to them. And if you look at some of the biggest podcasts that launched overnight into a huge success, a lot of them had an existing audience on some other platform. A lot of the big marketing podcasts I heard about that through their email list, because I was already subscribed. I wanted to know what they talk about, so I was already subscribed to their email. And they, once you send an email out saying here's a new podcast, this is an episode, this is what I talked about, you can drive a lot of engagement, a lot of listenership. And so email list is my biggest thing. I do not promote excessively because I have products and services to promote, and I try not to burn out my list with too many promotions. So it's always like, hey, I talked about this specific thing on my podcast. So if my audience loves listening about digital marketing and membership sites or online courses, I would create a specific episode for them. I would take questions that I see online and in various forums or Quora.com, and I'll answer specific questions. And then in an email newsletter, I'll say, hey, by the way, in my last episode, I talked about this topic. It's never just, hey, go listen to my podcast and subscribe and leave me a rating and a review. All that is nonsense. So the key is to provide value, build a list. And that is why even when promoting a podcast, I'd recommend that you don't really promote your podcast per se, especially when you're paying for ads. Always drive them to something that will uh, build your list. So give them a free bonus, very closely related to the niche of your podcast, and then try to get them on your list, get them to visit your website, know more about you. And so email is my number one, and then social media. I have paid hundreds of dollars to promote my podcast. There's a whole bunch of ways in which you can promote it through ads. And going on, one of the best ways to promote your podcast is by going on other people's podcasts. If you think of a new movie coming out, right? I use this example in my course, 1002 Fans. If you have a big star who's coming out with a new movie and they want to promote it, they're not saying, okay, let me start my own podcast. I want to start my own YouTube channel. I'm going to build a list from scratch. They're not doing that. They go on a very calculated, targeted tour of other shows, video shows, TV shows, podcasts, anywhere you can get. So other people's audiences, OPA, which is very key. So you need to be able to spend more, and that's why a lot of podcasters fail, because they're focused more on creating more content and trying to be on time and on target, and doing the thing consistently. All that is goes to waste if your content is not running ads, how much ever your budget will allow, to drive people to a landing page where you can collect their email addresses and give them some kind of a free bonus and establish a rapport with them, and going on other people's podcasts and doing joint ventures, maybe do a cross promotion. There's a lot of very creative ways you can promote your podcast.
Awesome. Thank you, Ravi. Is there any other questions there from you guys, like in terms of what you're doing? Actually, just while maybe people are thinking there, I'm just wondering, Ravi, I know you've done a training as well on because I have it on Alexa briefings. Would you like to maybe just talk a little bit about that? I mean, the guys mightn't be doing it necessarily, but I think it's a rather interesting approach to podcasting as well. And I think going forward, it's possibly something that we'll see more and more of.
Yes, so an Alexa flash briefing is something that is created by Amazon, and all Echo Alexa powered devices have access to that. What it really is you're just like you would submit your podcast to iTunes, you submit your show to Alexa. There's a way to, I talked about it in my book, Alexa flash briefings, and the format is, the reason they came up with this is it's almost like a micro podcast, like a Twitter for podcasting. So instead of a half an hour or 1 hour episode, which will not be suitable for an Alexa flash briefing, if you have a 3 to 5 or 7 minute podcast, you can take your RSS feed and submit it as an Alexa flash briefing, so that anybody who has an Alexa, when they say, I'm sorry, this is probably going to trigger your devices, already triggered your devices uh, by saying the word too many times. So if somebody says, Alexa, what's my flash briefing? Or Alexa, what's the news? It'll start reading. It's almost like you're subscribing to different flash briefings. It's almost like podcasts, mini podcasts. And it'll start playing those one after the other, whatever you have subscribed to, right? So if you submit your RSS feed, which is also a podcast, so you can do two things with basically repurposing your content, because you can take your existing podcast, which has an RSS feed, and if you host with say a Libsyn.com, I don't know if all the podcast hosts do it, You might have to open a ticket with them. Basically, you need to get an RSS feed that gives you only your latest episode, one episode, right, of your show, and that you can submit it to Alexa, and Alexa will take that and take the last 5 episodes of your show, and it'll store. So every time you release a new episode, it's only the latest one is the one that gets pinged to Alexa, and that's so that every time they say, "Hey, read the news," you're just not playing your last 5 episodes all the time. It just plays your latest episode. So some of the web hosts offer you with the existing feed. So you might have 200 episodes in your feed, but there's another format. They might give you a different link to get just the latest episode of your feed. That's what you submit to Alexa. So that, and so it's basically a new way to reach a new audience with your existing content. You're not creating anything special except for that special link which only provides one episode in your RSS feed. Other than that, it's the same thing. You take your existing podcast, you do your podcast as usual, and you take that and submit it to Alexa. Now, one thing I would say is, if it's more than 5-7 minutes, it's not suitable, because people who listen to Alexa flash briefings are not looking for long form content. They have podcasts for that, right? So they're looking for, word of the day, news of the day, joke of the day kind of things, 2 to 3, 5 minutes at most, ideal length of the content. And then if you have a podcast like that, if you're, collecting all the best news this week, tech news, or whatever is your niche. Let's say you're collecting all of that in the form of a podcast, then Alexa Flash Briefing is perfect for that, which means people are listening to these news podcasts, flash briefings, while they're brushing their teeth or having a morning coffee or breakfast or on the way to work, or uh, they're not typically long form, which means you cannot have the same elements as a regular podcast, which a lot of people get wrong. They'll be like, there'll be 30 seconds of music, and then somebody comes on, "Hey, what's going on? How's the weather there today? I did this. Yesterday I ate that. I met a friend over the weekend." So you can't have all the preamble and the slow setup and getting into it. You have to be fast. So if you have an Alexa device, you can even download the free Alexa app for your phone, and you can just try subscribing to a few Alexa flash briefings, and you can see how it's being done. And then you can uh, re- change the format of your existing podcast and repurpose it as a flash briefing. That means now, for the same content that you're already creating, now you open it up to 20, 30 million new people, and hope that you can build an audience through that.
I'll mute myself there. Thank you. That's a great synopsis of Alexa briefings, which I think sometimes it's kind of overlooked at the moment in terms of podcasting. I think I feel going forward because of Alexa and all those different types of devices, I think it's going to become more and more popular in the next maybe 2 years or whatever the case is. I'm just wondering as well, in terms of length of having a podcast, like how would you recommend people choose the length of time? Like is there a rule of thumb for particular industries, or what's your thoughts on that?
Now, somebody famously once said, "There's no such thing as too long, only too boring." So uh, you might have seen, some classic movies like, Godfather, or Lord of the Rings, 2 or 3 hour movies, which are, you can't look away, and you're so engaged, and you're so involved in the story because of the storytelling and the plot and everything else. And then there are, 60-70 minute movies that you want to walk away from in the first 10 minutes. So it's never about how long it is, it's about how interesting it is, and how much it is a match to your audience. So you always have to think about, and I think it was a person called Blaise Pascal. I think he was also the guy who wrote the Pascal language. It might be him. So he once said, if he once wrote in a letter, "If I could have made this letter any shorter, I would have." Uh, so sometimes it takes more time to say less,
Mhm.
right? Because it's easier when you write a book. it's easier to write a longer book than it is to write a shorter book. It is easier to ramble on and keep blabbering and talk about everything under the sun, and small talk and weather and this and that, and engagement, so-called engagement speak, and talk about everything else except the main topic. It is easier to make a longer podcast than it is to make a shorter one. So I would say, go with your gut feeling and keep it as short as necessary to say whatever it is that you need to say. And you don't have to drag anything along because you feel that you have a certain minutes restriction in mind. There are unbelievable podcasts that are 5 minutes long. There are, and I forget the name, Dan Dan Carlin, history podcast. His podcast, he's one of the he's in the top 1%. Lipson puts out these stats for various podcasts, and he is in the top 1% of downloads for all podcasts on Lipson. That's, you can extrapolate it to the general podcast audience, and that means he gets many million downloads per episode, and his average episode length is 5 hours.
Wow.
Yeah. So and if you see Joe Rogan and all these, Tim Ferriss, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, no questions asked, they just go. And if you are a fan of the content, if you're a fan of the host, you will listen for as long as you need to listen to, right?
Uh-huh.
And the beauty of podcasting is nobody is being forced to listen to everything in one setting.
Yes.
You can pause, you can fast forward, you can skip, you can put it on higher speed, you can skip entire segments, and so there's a lot of things you can do. So people have ultimate control over how they consume a podcast. So there's no restriction. If somebody is bored about a certain segment or a certain topic, they can always fast forward, they can listen faster if they want to consume it faster. But the key is there is no such thing as a specified recommended length. There is, it's only as good as you make it, and however long you are. Some topics just don't lend themselves to talking about for 20 minutes, let alone 2 hours. So if you're comfortable making a 5-minute podcast, news of the day, or word of the day, or something of the day, right? It's not going to be 20 minutes long. It can be 5 minutes. But for somebody who's interested in that niche, in your, if I'm trying to learn a foreign language, and you teach me about one word every day, and that's 3 to 5 minutes, it's gold for me, because it keeps me engaged. I'm learning the language, I'm passionate about something. So it's all about finding something you are passionate about, and then putting out solid content that puts out exactly the type of content you want to put out, without worrying about the content, because the content length is only for people who are on the radio, on television. They have hard ad breaks. That's why even when some people are talking about, there'll be a awesome guest. I don't know, your students might not be old enough to have a radio in their house, but people who have heard radio, you always, but you might be familiar with TV, with a television show. There might be a guest who's talking about some current event, and they'll be like, okay, hold on right there, we'll be right back after this commercial break. They have to break, because they're hard breaks based on their contracts, on how the TV stations work, how many ads they have sold. There are no restrictions of any kind on a podcast. So if a guest, obviously, as long as they're not rambling too much like I am right now, you can always cut them off if they're rambling too much. But otherwise, if they're talking about something interesting, it's great to follow up. I have been on so many podcasts where I will say, there was this one time when I got fired because an email I sent out was construed as spam by my employer, which is a true story, by the way. And they'll be like, okay, so what's your favorite book? And no follow-up. It's like you have to have a conversation, right? When people, and I even as a listener, I sometimes some guests will say something important, like especially sports shows. They'll talk about some famous athlete that I'm interested in, LeBron James or something, and they'll be like, oh, by the way, I ran into him across the hall, and they were doing this, and then, okay, so what happened next? Instead of saying that, they're like, okay, so where do you think the Lakers will be next year, or something like that?
Yes.
I'm like screaming, ask him a follow-up question, please. So a lot of podcasters treat it as if they're a radio host, where there are hard breaks. There are nothing. You can pause. You want to cough, you want to have a drink, the guest wants to have a drink, go to the restroom. There are no limits here. So make it as interesting as you want, have conversations as long as you want. Just make sure it's not boring and it's interesting. There are some podcasts where the host is talking about some super interesting subject, but their voice is like they feel like they have to talk, like they're running a meditation show where they have to put people to sleep. So you don't have to do that. So the key is to be interesting and go as long as you want. There are no limits.
Great. I love that answer. Thank you. Now we have a question here from Kritika. Kritika, are you able to unmute yourself there and ask Ravi your question?
Yes. Hi, Ravi. Thank you
Hi,
for being
Katika.
part of this class,
Sounds good.
and for your time, firstly.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, what were your favorite or like popular podcast platforms that you would suggest as probably to build a bigger audience? And does that even matter, like having a particular like range of platforms that we could use?
No, when it comes to distribution, why have a favorite? Submit it everywhere where they accept podcasts, right? No
Okay.
harm, no harm, no foul. There's no cost to it. So I would
Mm-hmm.
start with Apple Podcasts because they have the biggest. They have 60% listenership across all platforms, including the Apple Podcasts app and the iTunes desktop, which is going away, and Apple Home Kit and whatever else, right? Car Kit. So they have the biggest reach. So I would start with Apple Podcasts first, and if you search for Podcasts Connect,
Mm-hmm.
plural podcasts connect, and if you search Apple on Google, you'll see the Podcast Connect website. Go there, submit your podcast, start there, then submit it to Stitcher, iHeartRadio. In fact, I have all those details in my book, and like I told Emma, I'm happy to give you a free copy. Just send me an email to
That's great. Thank you.
Ravi at subscribeme.fm. And I actually sent a couple of people uh, who had already emailed me. And if you didn't receive that, please check your spam folder. For some reason, last few days, some of my emails have
Oh,
been
okay.
going to spam. So if you already gotten an email from me, make sure you submit it. I mean, you send me an email, and I'll send you a copy of the book, no charge. And I talk about some of the basic things: Stitcher, Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Spotify. Now, if you host with
Mm-hmm.
Libsyn.com, they'll submit it to iHeartRadio, Spotify, and something else. So you can get some integration through that. Or worst case, you can always go to Spotify and submit the podcast yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So any and every directory which accepts a podcast, submit it there. There's no reason to stop. And it all takes 5 to 5 minutes per platform at worst, right? 5 to 10 minutes. So don't submit it everywhere. Try to be everywhere because there's no cost, and your RSS feed is already created. And then a lot of the apps like Overcast app, uh, Pocket Cast, a lot of these listener apps, they scrape data from Apple Podcasts. So if it's not on Apple Podcasts, you will actually miss out on a lot of different apps because they all mirror the iTunes directory or the Apple Podcast directory. So that's where you would start, and then you just iHeartRadio, Spotify, and there's a whole bunch. You just go ahead one by one by one. Even some other web hosts like Blueberry and Podbean, they have their own directories, and you can submit it to them too, even if you're not hosting with them. It'll still be there. And having all those links pointing to your website, it gives you some good Google juice for SEO. So just submit it wherever you can.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Thank you, Kritika. I think Rowan has a question there as well for you, Ravi, please.
Sure, sounds good.
Yeah. Hi, Ravi. Thanks to join our class. So my question is regarding the two types of podcasts. So there are, as much as I know, there is audio and video. So what do you think about the reach of both? Like, what do people? Is there like a popular thing like doing an audio podcast or a video podcast, or both of them have a equal amount of reach?
I would not do a video podcast at this time. YouTube is your best chance for video, right? YouTube, Vimeo, those are the platforms to go. Video podcasts are not very popular because the whole purpose of a podcast is you can take your phone, play it, lock it, put it in your pocket, and keep going, right? And keep doing your stuff, whether you're going for a run, doing the dishes, walking the dog, driving to work. Video kind of defeats the purpose of video podcast, because if you, what's the point of, if you're just going to put an audio, uh,
Okay.
it, they can just listen to the audio version. Also, video podcasting is very expensive because who's going to host the video, right? Which means you got
Yeah.
to find a host for all those video bandwidth is very expensive, and YouTube is free, right? They don't charge you for the bandwidth. You know, the more your video gets watched, the better for your channel. But with video podcast hosting, the cost of the hosting the video will be higher, and then or you'll have to use your own Amazon S3 account. Your costs will go up considerably, and you have to think, what is the point? Because uh, I have never in I've been listening to podcasts from the time they were launched, 2005. I've never subscribed to a video podcast because it's not useful for me, and I would never recommend it for anybody. So if it's video, you want the maximum reach, put it on YouTube, Vimeo, all these video platforms, anywhere they would accept it, and then embed those videos on your website. That's for video. And you can strip out the audio from that video and create just an audio podcast, and it's a lot cheaper to host it. And uh, audio podcasts are probably, 90%, 99% more popular than a video podcast, because people don't do video podcasts anymore.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Great, thank you, Rowan. I'm not sure if anybody else has some questions. Is there anything else you'd like to highlight in terms of even just the tools that you would use, Ravi, in terms of microphones? And I know in your book you have mentioned kind of a starter kit, if you will, and then if you've got more money that you can look at kind of, I suppose, having a bit better equipment, if you will. But what do you recommend for people, or should they worry about all this equipment? Because it's a question I get asked on a consistent basis. I can start
No,
this, I can start that, but I'm kind of
yeah,
of
you
the
don't
mind,
need
just go ahead.
no, you don't need very expensive stuff. So I'm going to bring my mic here. This is the ATR 2100. It costs like $65, and I've done, hundreds and hundreds of episodes of my podcast and other videos and marketing videos and how-to videos and screencast videos and everything with a very simple $65 setup. So maybe a little more, because I have the pop filter, because I pop a lot as I speak. So I'll get this in front of like this, and I'll speak. I'll bring it closer to my mouth like this, and I can watch my screen as I do my podcast. I can look at my notes. It's a USB mic, $65 to $85, super inexpensive, the best mic I would recommend for most people. For pretty much anybody who's starting out, for 100% of the people who want to start a podcast, I would recommend the ATR 2100, which has been replaced now by a newer model, a 2100X. I have talked about that in my book, so I can, like I said, just send me an email and I'll send you a copy. So all you need is this cheap mic. When I say cheap, it's not cheap in quality, it's just inexpensive in price. Fantastic mic. I would not recommend something like the Blue Yeti, which is a condenser mic. This is a dynamic mic. This is all you need. It picks up only close range audio. It's front facing mic. It will not pick up even stuff when there are people mowing my lawn right outside my window. It will not pick it up. But the Blue Yeti will pick up, somebody down the corner, down the street mowing their lawn. A dog barking like 10 houses away, it'll pick up everything. It's super sensitive. And then you have to know how to use it, and even then it doesn't offer the greatest sound. So I would say ATR 2100 mic. It's USB. Plug it into your computer. Open up whatever Audacity or Hindenburg Journalist. These are the two ones I would recommend for those people getting started, because Audacity is free and open source, and Hindenburg Journalist is like $95 one time, and I think you have to later on pay for updates after a year or something. It's still inexpensive compared to something like Adobe Auphonic, not Auphonic, Audition, Adobe Audition, which costs you like $30 to $40 a month if you want to sign up for Adobe Creative Cloud subscription. Even to get, whether you want to get just one Adobe software, you have to sign up for the whole subscription for $30 or $40 or $50, depending on student and nonprofit and stuff. So that means you're paying $600 a year for the just if you're using just Audition. But if you're already using other Adobe products, Photoshop and um, the video editing tools and stuff, then it's already free for you. So then I would recommend Audition. But then you have to be super technical. It's not. The learning curve is pretty high. So I would say uh, just plug in the ATR 2100. It's a USB thing. You don't need any special interface or mixer or anything like that. Put it in, plug it into your computer, open Audacity, record it, learn how to edit with Audacity. There are tons and tons of YouTube tutorials to do that. Export it as a WAV file, WAV, and then you upload it to a website called Auphonic, AUPHONIC.com, which will clean up your audio, do some noise reduction, filtering, and volume levels and leveling, noise leveling, and everything else. So and make it perfect. Improve the volume. If you have multiple people talking, it'll bring them all up to the same level, and it works like magic on your audio. And you feed it in, and you get back MP3, and you take that MP3 and upload it to your podcast host. That's as simple as a configuration as it gets. And you can maybe start with the standard little mic, the stand that comes along, and you can put it on a bunch of books to get it high so that you're not bending down. Or you can just get a boom arm. Again, I have recommendations for that in my book. It's pretty inexpensive, $20. You can get a boom arm so you can swing it in and out. There's more stuff you can add. There's something called a shock mount. If you have a tendency to move the mic too much and touch it too much, or if it is connected to your table and you're clanking hard on your keyboard, it'll pick up some of the vibrations. So in that case, you can get another shock mount, which is like another $20, so that it'll insulate the mic from the little vibrations you may have going on. So about $120-$130, you should be able to get the entire setup, and you can have the playing field is so level that for $130 you can produce the same kind of content as somebody with $1,000 or $2,000 mic produces, because it's all about the content from there onwards.
Great, thank you, Ravi. And I'm just wondering as well, just in terms of business or putting a business head on this, because obviously the class here, they'll be finishing up shortly, they'll be writing their thesis, and then they'll be out, looking for work and whatnot. But I suppose fast forward to next year, and say they're working for a company and they say, we're thinking of doing a podcast, or they're pitching a podcast as a means of marketing for the business. And I suppose really what I'm trying to say is, like, what's the value to you from a business perspective to have a podcast? Like, what are you getting from it, like in dollars? Let's say, how are you making your money? Are you how do people quantify that? Because that's the question you're always going to get, like, why do a podcast? What's it going to bring to the table?
Right. So the very first thing, one of the questions you need to ask before you start a podcast is, why are you starting a podcast? If your answer is to make money, then you better stop right there, because podcasts are very tough to monetize, because there are only a few ways to monetize, right? There are many ways to monetize, but all of them are equally difficult. So the one thing most people think they're going to be able to do is build a big audience, get sponsors, make thousands of dollars, or hopefully tens of thousands of dollars. But for that, you need a big audience. And the average podcast gets 158 downloads per listen. Okay, 50% of the podcasts out there that are active get average about 158 downloads. That doesn't mean people are listening, just means that some app either download it or played it on their website or something, autoplay or something. So 158 downloads, if you're getting, you need to get to a minimum of 5,000 downloads per episode to even approach a company to say, I want a sponsorship. Now, we're talking about a company like Midroll, where the minimum expectation is like 5,000 downloads per episode. And so let me talk about that first. So if you go through a third-party company who arranges for sponsors, you have to have at least 5,000 downloads per episode. and that might take you 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, who knows. It's very hard to get, because there's a lot of podcasts, and that everything comes down to how well are you able to promote it, how big is your audience, can you reach them, will they care about your show, will they listen. So there's so many hurdles to get to 5,000 listeners. So I would not, and I have a saying, you want to make money not from your podcast, but because of your podcast. What I mean by that is, from your podcast means the podcast itself has to generate revenue, as in sponsorships, right? Affiliate, promoting affiliate links and promoting other people's products. Now, because of your podcast means you have a business, and you're using your podcast as a marketing platform to build deeper relationships with your potential audience. So a lot of, for me, my podcast is not a monetization model, business model. It is a relationship building model, right? Because of that, I've created plugins. I get a lot of, most of my coaching clients, I offer business coaching, and most of my coaching clients are people who have come to me from my podcast. Now, they might have been on my list somewhere at some point, they might have opened an email or two, they might have seen a post from me here and there, but the longer they listen to my podcast, I'm able to build a relationship with them, because there's something intimate about being able to listen to somebody, right? You feel like you know them, you know their idiosyncrasies, you know their accent, you know how they talk, you know their funny stuff, where they slip up. You know a lot about them when you listen to somebody over a long period of time. You develop a bond with them. And if you are good at talking and you talk like you're talking to one person, and you build that relationship, then next time you say something, hey, by the way, I'm offering this coaching program. If you're listening to podcast, use this coupon code, and I'm happy to give you 50% off or 40%, whatever it is. And I get a lot of people like that. So podcast should be looked at as a relationship building tool, not as a monetization machine, because by podcast by itself is going to be pretty hard. You can do, once you build up a large audience, then you can promote a lot of things. You can have a sponsor, and you can promote your products and services, and you can promote affiliate links, and you can promote t-shirts and tchotchkes and hats and whatever else you want, right? So and you can promote your books, you can promote your other podcast. So, but the key is to get to a big audience, and you'll only be able to get to grow your audience if you take money out of the picture in the beginning, because podcasting is really hard. A lot of other video is even hard. That's why if you see creating a YouTube video is not easy, especially if your face is on camera, because you have to learn to edit. Same thing with podcasting. You have to know, what is the topic, what are you going to talk about, are you going to be funny, are you going to be interesting, are you knowledgeable, are you an expert in your field. Then you have to start with a great show, and then, okay, now I have a great show, how do I get it to people? Just submitting it to all the directories doesn't mean they're going to find you, right? Then you start about thinking about interesting titles and descriptions, and then you bring on guests. Then you try to find ways to promote your podcast. It's simply posting the same podcast episode to your 200 family and friends is going to tire them. They're going to be upset that you're constantly posting about this same stuff. So you can't keep blasting your personal network with the podcast. So you have to find a new audience. So you have to think like a marketer. Where else can I promote this? How else can I promote it? Start an Instagram thing. Then now you suddenly like, okay, I started an Instagram account. I posted something and I'm getting like 3 likes. Now you go off on a tangent trying to figure out how to increase your Instagram followers, and then you post on Twitter and you don't get any likes. Now you're like, okay, I need to know how to. So people keep going off on this tangent. So it's going to be very hard to grow your audience if you start with making money as the first thing. The first thing it would be to create a great show, talk about something, because you need to be in this for the long term. There are no short term. It's like literally like saving for in retirement. Think of it. If you tell a young person you need to spend the next 30 years saving for retirement, they're going to roll their eyes and say, yeah, right. So you think of it as planting a tree. It's going to grow slow, but one day it's going to bear fruit. So you cannot rush the process. It might take you 6 months. It might take you 3 years to get to a few hundred or few thousand. So focus on a great show, promoting it, and learn all the ways in which you can promote your podcast, build a list. And then once you have a decent audience, all along the same time, You could be monetizing in several ways. You can sign up for affiliate programs for products and services you use. You can announce them as sponsors, make sure you get permission. You say, hey, by the way, this episode is sponsored by um, the mouse I use, Logitech mouse, right? And you can sign up for the affiliate program. You can promote your Amazon affiliate links. You can go to authors and publishers and software sellers whose software you use and say, hey, can you make me an affiliate? I would like to promote you on my podcast. So you can say, hey, this episode is sponsored by Camtasia or whatever software. So you can Adobe Audition. And so there are a lot of ways in which you can start promoting little by little in the beginning, and so you can at least make back your if the pocket change for your hosting and everything else. But the key is to always focus on your audience and make a great show, and everything else follows from there.
Great answer. Thank you. I was looking, yeah, it's great to get some insight, when people are doing it quite a long time. And also for the class, I think just in general to kind of hear different approaches. I know a colleague of mine, she started doing a podcast probably about 2 years ago now, near enough, and about a year in, she was actually approached by Google, and so now, as a result of, somebody in Google happened to pick up her podcast. It was a business podcast, and they approached her, and so now actually she flies to London. She's based in Ireland, and she regularly would do training with them. So they're her client, and that literally came from the podcast. Now that obviously wasn't her goal to start with.
Right.
She
Exactly.
and I think that's the point you're making. It's the goal wasn't to make money. The goal was to have a great podcast. She had great subjects and people were interested,
and she probably did a lot of networking too. So
yes,
it's not just putting out the content and saying, okay, where's the money? Come on, show me the money, right?
Yeah.
It's about promoting it, making contacts, doing free calls, doing networking calls, trying to meet the right people, and then going after sponsors and trying to, you might have 100, there was once a story that there was a surgeon's podcast with 50 downloads, and his 50 clients who are listening to his podcast. I don't know if it's true or just a myth, but he had 50 podcasts. All of those 50 downloads, he had 50 downloads, and all of his 50 listeners were like the richest surgeons, brain surgeons or something in the world. And he was able to charge, $50,000 for a sponsorship for each episode, even though he had only 50 listeners. But that's just, it may not be true, but it gives you an idea that you can have 200 downloads, doesn't matter. But if you are attracting the right kind of crowd, now you can go to advertisers and say, I have 200, and you have to have an engaged audience, right?
Mm-hmm.
So which means if you tell your audience, hey, I want to know what is your number one thing you love or hate about my show, and you should be able to get, at least 10-20% of feedback. That means your audience is engaged. If they're not, it doesn't matter what sponsorship you get. Whatever you're saying, if they don't care for it, or if they're not taking action on the sponsorship, then you might get a sponsorship for 1 or 2 episodes, and then the advertiser is like, my money I'm paying this person is not working because his or her audience is not taking action, so it's waste for me. So there's so many other aspects. You don't have to wait for 5,000 downloads. You can in fact, I believe I was probably the only person ever to do this, and which is I sold 2 sponsorship, 2 ads on the first 2 episodes of my podcast 1 month before I had even launched my podcast. I had never launched a podcast. I had never done a podcast. I said, I'm going to launch a podcast, and I'm going to accept ads. And 2 people, and I did it through eBay. I figured out a loophole on eBay to create a auction for advertising on my podcast. And there were, I think, 13 bids, and one person won to pay $500 for the first episode. And I had not launched a podcast, but that was because I had already built up my reputation previously as a marketer by creating. He was a customer of mine. He had bought products and services from me, so I had known him for 10 years at that point, and he was one of the people who bid for the spot, and he paid $500 by winning the eBay auction. And then for the second episode, I went back to him and said, I'll give you 50% off because it'll help me not have to do this again. And he said, no problem. So first 2 episodes I had already sold for $750 I made before I launched my first podcast. That just goes to show you that it's not just about how many downloads, how many listeners, nothing. It's all about relationships, how good you are, how good your content is, or at least how good your content can be proven to be, how you can communicate the value of your content and the value of your audience to potential sponsors. But then if you're going to go after sponsors one episode at a time, then you need to know how to market it. Right now you're going to sponsors and saying, I have 500 downloads, and these are all people who are super into you know dog training. They absolutely love dogs, and they've signed up for my courses. These people are paying me money. They're all listening to my podcast. You can go to a pet product service, or a product like food, pet products, dog training, or whatever, some dog accessory. You can go to them and say, hey, make me an affiliate and promise me, or make me a minimum guarantee. I'll do it for $50 an episode. I'll give you, normally it's like $300. I'll give you for 50 because I'm just getting started and I have all these listeners, and I will promote you on social media. I'll promote you on my Facebook channel. I'll promote you on Twitter. I'll send an email about you to my list. So you have to convince people, and you can get, from day one, you can have a sponsor for your first episode. It might be $10 or $20 or $50, whatever it is. You have, again, that comes down to, can you be a marketer? Can you convince people, and not ripping them off or not defrauding them, but providing the true value? And you can do that only if you know what you're talking about. You're an expert in your field. You know how to reach people. You know how to talk to people, and you're putting out great content. So there's so many different, sorry to interrupt you, but go back to your friend with the Google sponsorship.
No, that's great. I mean, thank you, because I think this is great because, it's giving bird's eye view, I think, for all of us here in terms of different ways of approaching this. And I think it's key to note here in terms of digital that there is no one way. It really is got to do with, who is your audience? What are you doing? Like, in terms of all the questions we've looked at, in terms of how long the episodes should be, how should you market them, all that sort of thing. And really, from what you're saying, it's, or correct me if I'm wrong, it's about developing relationships. It's about, that's key to this. It's not like, you can't just pop up and say, I'm doing a podcast today and expect sponsorship. You've already been doing work in the marketplace. And equally, the girl that I was talking about that launched her podcast, she had been doing the same. So it wasn't a case of, I finished school yesterday, I'm doing a podcast today, nobody's ever heard of me. There was a lot more behind.
You don't have an existing audience, right?
Yeah, so I think they're just important things to recognize, because obviously if the class are creating these podcasts and YouTube channels, it's worth noting that if you don't have a following already on digital marketing, there is a challenge there in terms of getting known in the first place. And obviously you're aware of that, and obviously I am as well. But just to note that you can't expect to have 5,000 downloads the first day or the first week or maybe even the first year or two.
Yeah.
So you've got to develop that. And a rule of thumb I seem to hear is that when people are doing podcasts, that it seems to be about 10 months in, that when people are regularly doing podcasts, say on a weekly basis, for example, that about 10 months in, they really start to see traction. And this is obviously an average, but I seem to hear that
Correct.
quite regularly.
Yeah, about a year.
Yeah, so it give or take. And it's not to say that they're doing massively well, but that they're starting to see it taking off, and they're starting to see clients coming back in, or even if it's only one client, but they're starting to see, all this hard work is starting to work in terms of creating authority in a particular niche or whatever the case might be.
But like you said, you have to have, if you want clients from your podcast, you need to be selling something, right? A product or a service. Otherwise, you're 10 months in, you might not have grown to you don't need 5,000 downloads to get, the concept of 1,000 true fans by Kevin Kelly is that you just need 1,000 people to pay you $100 a year, and you have $100,000 and you can make a comfortable living. You're not going to become a millionaire or billionaire, but $100,000, just to give you an idea, a round number, right? $100,000 is a pretty good number for most people to live on, right? Comfortably. And so you just need 1,000 people who will buy stuff from you regularly. You don't need 5,000 of anything. And in the beginning, you don't even need 1,000 people. Can you start with one person? can you sell something to one person? Can you convince them to become your coaching client? Will they sign up for your coaching? That means you have to say intelligent stuff. That means you have to know what you're talking about, right? So all expertise comes first, your authority, what you know, what you're talking about, what are you teaching. For example, a true crime podcast has the potential for millions and millions and millions of downloads. But if I'm teaching how to write a Kindle book, you're not going to have that same level of the average person doesn't care about how to write a Kindle book, right? It's a very specific niche of people, authors and publishers. And then within that, if you're saying how to write a book about, the more niche you are, the more niche your topic is, the smaller the audience. So you may have the best show in your niche, but the scope of your audience might not be all that big. If you're teaching underwater basket weaving, imagine the scope of that. It's not going to be very, very big, right? Or how to grow a fern tree, or what are the little Japanese trees? I forget the name. So how, if you're that's what you're teaching, your audience is not going to be very big. And again, does your advice and your talking, does it lend to the audio format? And you have to be able to do this week after week after week, or a couple of times a week, month after month after month. So that means now you have to have that much content to come up with. That means you should be good at doing research and finding out what people are looking for. Maybe you bring on guests. Maybe so there's a lot of things you have to be doing at the same time, uh, and you have to do it consistently to grow your audience. And that's where a lot of people will give up. And there's also another stat that says the average podcast dies after 10 episodes. Most podcasts don't get past 10 episodes. um, that's because they realize how hard it is. Because with blogging, you can blog a few lines a day, right? If you're writing a blog, you can do a little bit here, you can go back and edit it, and you can ask somebody to proofread it, you can do something. But with the podcast, you have to be the one speaking. You can't record 5 lines of podcast every day, because every other paragraph your voice will sound different in the podcast. Some days you may not have background noise, in some parts will have background noise. So you can't do it in bits and pieces. And so podcasting is a lot harder. And another problem a lot of people run into is the editing part, which is probably where a lot of people get stuck. uh, so editing takes time, which means you have to learn a new tool, and you have to know how to do that, and you have to figure out the editing and making it good. And then there's a whole process. And then after 10 episodes, people get tired because putting in all 3 4 5 hours of work per episode. They're not seeing the traction, and they give up. So that's why. And if you look at any celebrity, any champion in any sport, right, whether it's LeBron James or Serena Williams or anybody, or Tiger Woods, they didn't say, you know what, I'm going to start playing golf or tennis because one day I'm going to make hundreds of millions of dollars. If they started out with money in the mind, they would never have gotten past the lows, or the when you hit a plateau and you're not getting better. To be able to get through what Seth Godin calls the dip, to be able to get through the dip, you have to have a lot of passion, and you have to have super energy and excitement in your industry. And so if just making money is your goal, podcasting is not even in the top 10 things you can do to make money. If that's all your goal is, there are a lot better ways to make money faster. You're not even talking about stock trading and all the stuff. You're talking about building a list and then promoting stuff to them, and building a website, and creating a WordPress plugin or a SaaS product. Writing a Kindle book. And so many other ways to, if you want to just make money, there are many other ways to make money in the short term. Podcasting is a long-term play. Think of it as a retirement account. That's how much patience you need to have.
Okay, retirement account, I love that. Thank you, Ravi. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and effort, because obviously it must be like 1 a.m. or something with you now.
Yeah.
So that's quite late.
125.
125. Oh my goodness. So thank you so much. I really, really appreciate, and the class, I know, really, really appreciate your time, particularly as it's so late there. So thank you for agreeing to do this. Is there anything else you'd like to add? I know I've shared the link in the Facebook group. I'll send it out on email as well, just to make sure. But Ravi has very kindly offered to give us a free copy of his book. I downloaded it yesterday, and I think there's at least 2 people. I'm not sure how many others would have downloaded it, but please download it. All the links are in there. Everything he spoke about in terms of the microphones, everything you need to know about podcasting is in that book. I'd like to thank Ravi for that, because I really, really appreciate that. And I know you have a lot of other content as well. If people want to read them in terms of be it Alexa briefings, or you are a bit of a geek, dare I say, I think,
Yeah.
Ravi, in terms of all this type of the technical aspect in particular of running kind of online digital marketing. But thank you so much. Is there anything else you'd like to add yourself in terms of the students, give them any advice or anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, start with it all starts with the passion first, the usual cliched statements: passion, commitment, endurance, and consistency and all that stuff. So the key is uh, to ask yourself, why do you need to start a podcast? And what do you expect to get out of it? Do you have the energy and the um, expertise to talk about something? Because there are probably tens of thousands of podcasts, two guys in their basement drinking beer talking about uh, current events and their life. Nobody cares about that, trust me. Nobody wants to know the four guys or four friends, four girls, whatever it is, actually getting together. Yes, there are probably iTunes top, Apple Podcast topper charts where there's a few podcasts like that where just a couple of friends get together, but they did it for a long time, and they probably did a lot of things right, like the perfect storm for them to get to that point. But the average show, that is why there are close to 1 million podcasts, I believe, at this time, and there are only like 350,000 active podcasts or something, ridiculously low compared to the overall number of podcasts in the store. A lot of them are not active. They part fade because they can't sustain it. So make sure you're not starting a podcast because you're bored. That is the key, right? You don't know what to do. Hey, everybody's talking about starting a podcast. Why not start one? That should not be the goal to start a podcast. It should be about, man, I have so much to share. I want to talk so much about this stuff. I have so much to share, so much knowledge, so much experience, so much perspective. I just wish I could just transfer all this knowledge into people's heads. I just wish I could have a platform where I could talk about this stuff and show you how much I know. If you are coming from that point for any topic, whether it's dog training or underwater basket weaving or whatever it is, if you have that level of passion and commitment and you want to learn, if you want to share a message, whether it is about religion or sports or whatever it is, if you are passionate about something and you wish that you had that friend, who you could just get on the phone with, and every time you meet that friend who has the same kind of passions as you, and you can't stop talking about the sports event last week or whatever it is that you guys have in common. If you have that kind of chemistry with somebody, now you can start a podcast about that, and if you do a good job, your listeners will develop that same kind of chemistry where you meet a long lost friend and you just can't wait to talk to them about this particular topic, not just catching up on your life, but about a particular topic, right? So just focus on what your topic is. Do a lot of research. Who's your audience? Who's your target audience? Where are they? How will you reach them? How are you going to promote them? Do you have a budget for promotion? Do you have an existing audience? Why podcasting? Why not a YouTube channel? So you have to answer those questions, right? Because YouTube discovery is a lot easier than a podcast discovery, because there are more people on YouTube searching for more things than the people who are searching in Apple Podcasts for keywords, right? On Google, so the combined search, Google is the number one search engine, YouTube is the second biggest search engine. Imagine number of people searching for stuff. There are more chances your YouTube video will be found by them than somebody searching for on a small tablet for something, and your podcast showing up at the top, in the top 5 or 10. So you have to think about the whole thing. Think about the why you're starting it. What is it in for you? What will your audience get from it? And think about all those things. Actually, I have a list of questions to ask yourself in the book. So make sure you send me an email, Ravi at subscribeme.fm, and check out my podcast. And I would actually, having talked so much nonsense for so long, I would like to hear what you guys think of my podcast. So if you can, please check it out at subscribeme.fm, or just search for subscribeme.fm in your favorite podcast app. Subscribe to it. Let me know what you think. Be brutally honest. I always like to learn. I never get offended by feedback. Let me know what you think, and if I can improve on anything, I'm open to that. I'm always trying to improve. So let me know what you think, and check out my podcast.
Great, thank you so much, Ravi. I was actually asking the guys if they don't mind. I was trying to get a picture of everyone. If they don't mind turning on your videos, guys, I was just going to get a screenshot. So instead of names, we can actually see people, if that's okay with everyone. If you don't mind just putting on your video, that'd be great. Do you have much more?
Hopefully they're not falling asleep with my soliloquy.
Maybe just shy, maybe, I think. Running to take their pajamas off or something, I don't know.
Right.
But yeah, look, do you have much more work on tonight, Ravi, or what's your plan? Because you're saying you normally stay up until 5 a.m. That's quite a night.
Yeah, so I wake up pretty late. I wake up at 1 o'clock, 12:30, 1 o'clock. So I'm not depriving myself of any sleep. The whole thing is shifted for me. Right from college, I used to love working in the night, and somehow that stuck to me. So last 10 years, I've been a full-time entrepreneur. For that, I used to work in New York, go to a job. So ever since I quit my job and came to San Diego, slowly I've gone back to my youth days, where there's no commitment to getting up in the morning and having to be somewhere at a certain time. No commuting. My biggest commute is from my bedroom to my office, which is like 20 steps. So that's that's the longest commute.
Great.
So I love working in the night.
Great, good stuff. It's great to hear from other people's perspectives as well, because sometimes there's this assumption that you have to be up at 5 a.m. and there's kind of like the 5 a.m. club, so to speak. So it's great to hear it the other way around.
Yeah, you don't have to get up at 3 a.m. in the morning or 5 a.m. to be great. You just have to be great in the hours that you're awake. It doesn't matter when it is.
Great, absolutely. Well, Ravi, I'd just like to thank you very much again. I know you've got a busy schedule ahead of yourself, so I'd really like to thank you. If I can help you in any way with anything, do reach out. I have no problem sharing it. Maybe some of the guys here might like to share your podcast or help share out about the book or something like that. I'm sure Ravi would appreciate that, because the more people that hear about it and know about it, obviously the more people that are likely to buy and subscribe maybe to his podcast as well. That would be great. But again, thank you so much, Ravi. Really, really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me, and say hi to your little one over there. She's being very sweet.
She's trying to wreck the computer now, so I think I have to take a break. So just for the guys, we're going to take a break now and come back at probably 10:15, which is 10:15. Just get a coffee break in. It's early here, so we'll do that. But again, thank you so much, Ravi. I really appreciate your time